Good afternoon and welcome to this week's discussion on our book, Parenting in the Pew. Today we look at chapters 7 and 8. Chapter 7 talks about how we teach our children prayer, and in particular corporate prayer, or the kind of prayers we do all together and in community in worship. And then also in chapter 8, how we teach our kids to listen to the sermon. And I think we've all had challenges at different times as adults, even listening to the sermon. I had to chuckle at her use of the example of Eutychus, who fell asleep during Paul's sermon and then fell out the window and died. I'm sure, although that maybe hasn't happened to any of us, it maybe has felt like it had. So teaching our kids to get through the sermon can certainly be a challenge to us as well, and I totally get that. But both chapters challenged me a little bit, and here's how that happened for me, or how it felt for me. In the chapter on prayer, the author reminded that it's not just about teaching kids to pray along with adults in worship, but also finding a way for children's prayers to be heard in worship. That was a little convicting for me. We try very hard to find different ways to make sure children are involved in the whole worship process. And one thing that I don't know that I've ever done is had children pray out loud in worship. And children tend to be braver than adults, oftentimes with that type of thing. So I'm not sure I can use that as an excuse that they might not want to. So that aspect was challenging for me there. And then also with the section on sermons and how important the children's sermon is and how we preach to a cross-generational group of people. I'm doing a lot of reflection on that after reading that chapter. I do have some disagreement with the author in that chapter. I don't believe the pastor is the only one who is qualified to give a children's sermon. I think it's good for children to hear a variety of adult voices and people of faith, that the pastor isn't the sole expert. She mentioned disasters that can happen, and well, to be honest, I'm not sure if I think it's a disaster if one adult comes up and gives a different theological perspective on a story than the pastor. I think that's real life. I don't think any congregation, any group, any organization truly thinks in lockstep with each other. Being part of a church, having the Holy Spirit in and amongst us is always a messy process. And to model that for our children, that isn't always such a bad thing. It's, unless there's something way out in left field, I certainly wouldn't call it a disaster. So there's a lot of thinking there that I have been doing on those two subjects. So I am anxious to hear from you and what you're thinking about. The discussion questions will center around your prayer life. How have you learned to pray, and how is that a part of your faith life? How do you feel about being able to teach your kids and model that for your kids? Also, she did give some really good tips, I think, to helping children of different ages learn to listen to the sermon, little bits at a time and depending on age. Just wondering which of those ideas resonated with you or caught your attention, or do you have one of your own? And then always I'm anxious to hear what we at the church can do to support you in all this. And that too is one of, I think, the most important points that came across to me, particularly in the sermon chapter, is that teaching our children faith, teaching them to worship, is not just the parent's job, and it's not just the pastor's job or even the church's job, that this is really a team effort. In faith, it does indeed take a village. All of us together working to help our children grow in faith and learn the practices of what we believe and how we live out our faith. All right, looking forward to your comments and questions. They are always welcome, and have a blessed day.